Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland? Which tight end should the Colts reach for in the first round? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com, and the guy who's drawn the ire of all of Colts Nation by saying reach with Tyler Warren in that opening there. I got your guys' attention. There. I'm joined today by Ben Boris at Colts Film Room to talk through some NFL draft stuff. Ben is a regular guest on this show at this point. I think we can comfortably say that now, Ben.
Yeah, reoccurring guest.
Yeah, reoccurring guest. You know, you're the Kimmy Gibbler or whatever of the show here from Full House. But yeah, he's a regular guest on this show here. And I basically asked him this morning, you know, what draft topics do you want to talk about? And Ben, being a Penn State alum who you said you worked for Penn State when Tyler Warren was a guy there?
Yeah, it was a year before-ish, but
there we go.
I'm not, you're like addressing my biases because like I'm not actually biased.
I know. We're going to talk through it. We're going to talk
through it out.
No, I know. We're going to set this up, but no, we're going to talk through the tight end debate, or the two tight ends that the Colts could consider in round one, with Colston Loveland and obviously Tyler Warren, who everybody in Indianapolis wants to come to the Colts at 14. Then we're going to talk through some running backs because that's what Ben wanted to go to after that. And then we're going to give just our overall thoughts on the 2025 draft as of right now, and also how we could see this Colts team really attack the draft. But let's kick this off with probably the biggest debate of the draft season when it comes to the Colts. Like, everyone knows the Colts need a tight end in this draft, and they missed out on the slam dunk pick last year in Brock Bowers. There were rumors the Colts tried to move up. Bowers could have been one of the guys they were looking at. They missed out. Bowers breaks every rookie record that you can possibly have for a tight end. So now, I'm not going to say overcompensating, but now it kind of feels like, hey, we have another really good tight end prospect. The Colts are kind of in the range for him, and that is Tyler Warren from Penn State. Loveland also falls into this, so we'll talk about him as well. But Tyler Warren, biases aside, Ben, this has been a guy that you've been on for a while, and he had a great season this past year.
Yeah, so allow me to Zach talks about my biases. I'm not biased at all. So because if he had gone to Tulane, I would have thought he was the same player.
You're just more exposed to his film, is what you are.
Yeah,
you're not biased at all.
Yeah, I'm really not. So here's the way that I look at this Colts offense, especially under Shane Steichen, and then the way the team's built as well. They are a team that wants to be an 11 personnel. So that would be one running back, one tight end, 3 wide receivers. They don't want to take Josh Downs off the field. They want him to be on the field. Well, I thought the problem, and the data would also show you this, when Shane Steichen got to Indianapolis, they were 3rd in the league in 11 personnel usage. And then this year they kind of dropped off, and we can talk about reason. They were still top 10 though. They were 10th in 11 personnel. They are a team that wants to keep 3 wide receivers on the field. That lends itself to figuring out, okay, so what are we going to do out of 11 in that personnel packages? And I thought that the problem that the Colts ran into was that they were a little bit too predictable about what plays they were going to run with what tight end. I think obviously we know what ALIE-COX and Drew Ogletree can bring to the table from their ability to block, but I think what defenses also know that. So when they're out there, what Chris Ballard basically said, they didn't have to prepare for someone over the middle of the field. And they also can kind of sell out a little bit against the run or these heavy play action concepts. So I thought that's the problem that the Colts got into. I think the other thing that you can talk about is they have been, coincidentally or not coincidentally, 23rd in red zone scoring percentage in the past 2 years. That for an offense that should be nasty in the red zone with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson, that's an area that they've certainly struggled with to get mismatches down there. And also considering that their wide receivers are built like power forwards. So that's a place that they need help. But I think where Tyler Warren becomes the best fit for the Indianapolis Colts in the draft is the playbook is entirely open from 11 personnel. You can keep Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, and Michael Pittman, and it doesn't matter what run you're going to call. It doesn't matter what pass you're going to call. He's going to be able to execute it, and you don't have to call what some offensive coordinators would call 11 heavy. So like for the Green Bay Packers, that would be 11 personnel with Mercedes Lewis. Or basically your blocking tight end is out there in 11 personnel. And you don't need to do that with Tyler Warren because he can do everything that that guy can do, play on the line of scrimmage. But he can also be a guy that if you needed to flex him out wide, you could. If you need him to play off and be kind of the sniffer type, he could. And I think that that versatility lends itself to an offense that doesn't put a lot of tight ends on the field very often.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that is kind of the final piece that the Colts need on offense. Like when we look at this Colts offense, despite it having a much worse season than the Colts defense did, surprisingly, the Colts offense was not very good by any account last year. It feels like they're closer to being there because of they have the personnel in pretty much every spot except maybe quarterback and then tight end. You know, like they have the offensive line, they have the receivers, they have the running back, they have the play caller, we think, you and I think.
Yeah.
But they just need that middle of the field threat at tight end. And they need a guy who, like you said, I think you said it perfectly there. They need it to not be so predictable at tight end. You know, like when Mo's on the field, he's not catching the ball.
They knew that there was going to be a gap scheme run, or especially when it was 12 personnel with Ogletree and ALIE-COX, they did a lot of max protect. So that was really what they were trying to do. But to your point, like for as far away as this offense is, if you look at an offensive line that will be nothing at the bare minimum will be league average with Chris Ballard, considering how he invests in it. Alec Pierce, who had a pretty good season this past year, Michael Pittman, who was pretty much played the entire year banged up, but he was 100 catches the year prior, Josh Downs, and then you add Tyler Warren and Jonathan Taylor. Like I don't see that this becomes a nasty offense. If you can get decent quarterback play. So they're probably closer to being a good unit than the defense is, despite probably having the worst year out of the two.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well. So getting to how we kind of value these two tight ends, though, because these are really the two guys that I've identified, and I'm sure you have to like a lesser degree in terms of like Loveland, but these are the two guys that can do what you said from day one. They can come in, be your number one tight end, be a guy who can both work in the run game, work in the passing game, be an actual threat over the middle of the field. Maybe not Brock Bowers' impact from day one, but you get a good plus player into your offense. So now it comes to the valuation. You know, Warren, I feel comfortable saying we're both good with taking him at 14, but where do we feel about trading up for a guy like Tyler Warren?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that I think that definitely gets people rattled. I would say it's not going to be like Brock Bowers, where I don't think this is crazy to say, but if you had to look through last year's draft class, like I think if there was one player who is going to be like a Hall of Fame player already, like I think Brock Bowers would be that guy. I don't think Tyler Warren's the same player for the fact that, you know, I think a lot of hype is like, oh, he's got to come in and break the rookie passing record. And I don't think that's not who he is. He's not a guy. Brock Bowers essentially played, in my opinion, as a big wide receiver in that offense. He was essentially your wide receiver one. He just happened to line up where a tight end lines up and happened to be a little bit bigger. Tyler Warren's a guy that's going to give you impact on a down and down out basis, but the stat sheet might not always show that. So it's probably a little bit too early. I do think that you would have to, I think I would be okay with trading up maybe a couple spots if you thought that someone like Denver or the Chargers were like lurking in the wind. But I don't think it would be a scenario where you need to get up to 7 or 6 and try and like jump the Jets or anything like that. This is not that type of player.
Yeah. And then the follow-up question is, say Warren does go at like 8 or 9, because this is not a very top-heavy draft class. And I could certainly see a world where Warren goes like number 8 or number 9, and the Colts miss out on that. And let's also say in this scenario, like Malachi Starks is off the board too. Let's take away another player that everybody loves for the Colts. Could you see someone like Loveland being in play at 14? Again, I know you and I are a little bit lower on Loveland compared to like that valuation, but just because the Colts need it so much on this offense, like would you take him at 14?
It's a tough question. So I think that Loveland is a better fit for the Chargers or like the Ravens, these teams that are going to go heavy personnel, because he could essentially be your big slot receiver. He could basically be that guy. The Colts don't necessarily do that. So I think what's kind of grown on me with Loveland is he is credible enough as an inline blocker that teams don't need to like an epidemic that I think we're seeing with some of these guys is defenses will just match or 12 personnel, so 2 tight ends in the game with nickel defense, because they basically don't believe that Brock Bowers is any better of a blocker than a wide receiver, essentially is what they're saying. Loveland kind of gives that. So the way that I would say it is he is good enough in 11 personnel, not to the degree of Warren, but you would need to have a complementary tight end like a Drew Ogletree who could be on the line of scrimmage, taking on some of those defensive ends at the point of attack, while Loveland is the type of guy you want on your linebackers and safeties. So would I take him at 14? I think that's definitely depending on how free agency goes, but I think he's the type of guy where I'm not as enthusiastic for the reason of he's not the same size. It doesn't have the same play strength that I think Warren does to be that dynamic run blocker, which we know the Colts want to do with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree there. But you guys let us know what you think in the comment section. Let's pose the question to you guys. Would you trade up for Warren, or would you stay put and take Loveland at 14, or even make it even harder? Would you trade back and take Loveland, or trade up for Warren? Which one is more enticing to you guys there? I think that could be an interesting question there in the comment section. But coming up, we're going to stay on the offense. We've been talking a lot about the defense this offseason, but we're going to stick with the offense and talk about some running backs. Now, the Colts have Jonathan Taylor, who ran for like 800 yards in the final 4 weeks of the season. But you want to keep that mileage low. You want to get a second running back in here, and this class looks ready to go with running backs. So we're going to talk about running backs here in just a second. But first, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Just like a week or two ago, the Pacers had this huge comeback against the Washington Wizards. I was watching that game, and if I just had my FanDuel app open, I could have won some good money because, look, the Wizards don't really care about winning this year, and the Pacers are a resilient little team when they have their good moments, for sure. So if you guys want to make some money, go to FanDuel right now, and you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we're back with Ben Boris at Colts Film Room to talk some 2025 NFL Draft. And we talked about tight ends in the first segment. That's obviously the big discussion point right now, especially when it comes to the Colts offense. But I do think backup running back, or like rotational running back, is such an underrated need. And unlike tight end and all these other positions that we talk about, a need for the Colts, you can kind of look at those in free agency. When it comes to a backup running back, though, you just want to get running backs young, man. You want to get young running backs in here because the college game is producing so many good running backs to where these guys are burning out by the time they're hitting free agency. So this class looks to be really good. Maybe not the generational running back class that some people were touting during the season, but still a pretty darn good running back class. So I'll pose this question to you first, Ben, to kind of kick off this segment. How early do you consider running back for the Colts? Like, is there a guy in round 2, or I mean, dare I say round 1, but round 2, where you're like, maybe the Colts should just take him because it makes your offense so much better? Like, how early are you considering running back in this class?
Without knowing free agency, without knowing on the board, yes, I do think in the second round, without knowing those two, and depending that the Colts were active in free agency and filled up some of their additional holes, I do. I think that this is when you look at what's kind of, so Jonathan Taylor is going to always be, as long as he's here, I think he's going to take the bulk of the carries. Like, this isn't a Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery type style. This is a Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry thing where Jonathan Taylor is going to get the bulk of the reps. What the Colts do need is, and they've pretty much told you in the past 2 years that this is what they're going to do, is when the Colts are in a pure, we saw it in the Green Bay game, we've seen it in the New Orleans Saints game 2 years ago, is like when the Colts are down in a game and they are passing the ball, they will take Jonathan Taylor off the field. He will come off the field. And I think where the Colts could, and what they really got in Zach Moss and a little bit in Trey Sermon is the ability to pass protect. And I think that's an underrated part that we probably aren't talking about when it comes to running backs, because we're thinking, oh, like, let's just copy the Montgomery Gibbs model. So let's just get like Travion Henderson, who by the way is a great pass blocker, but like that just kind of like, or that Dylan Sampson, that guy who just get a little underside, but he's got the pure play speed and juice, and he'll just be like the great change of pace back. I think there's certainly some value in that. I think we kind of saw a little bit like even the Miami game with Tyler Goodson, where we got some of that like extra juice out of the backfield. But I think that they ultimately need a guy that can pass protect. If Quinshon Judkins is there in the second round, that's a guy for me who like that guy will stick his nose and take on linebackers blitzing. He will protect the quarterback. So that's a guy for me that I've identified who, you know, can come in, maybe not going to get all the carries right away. He didn't get all the carries at Ohio State, and be productive when his number's called. But also if it's third down and they need to block up a pressure, he can do it.
Yeah, I think if the Colts do consider a running back, I think round 2 would be a little bit high for like a pass blocker, pass catcher. Like Judkins, I love Judkins. I do. Round 2 is a little high, I think, for the Colts. He might go round 2 because I do think he's a good player. But I do think like once you get into like round 3 territory in this class, and say like
that would be provided on free agency. Let me before everyone roasts me in the comments, like they would
you're good.
Some significant work in free agency to just say to go pure best player available there.
Right. Yeah, and Judkins could be best player available by the Colts second round pick. Like he's a very, very good player. But I do think like round 3, round 4, round 5 in this class, like you could talk me into any type of running back. Like it doesn't even need to be just the pass blocker or pass catcher. It could be just the explosive guy that comes off the bench. It could be the tough running in between the tackles.
Cam Scatterbo.
Yeah, like they really, Scatterbo kind of fits a lot of those because the hard runner and the pass catcher.
Ollie Gordon.
Do that. Yeah, Ollie Gordon, a huge guy that runs downhill. Yeah, and they missed that last year when Zach Moss walked. You know, they didn't have that type of rotational guy that could come in, bring a little bit of juice, a little bit of physicality, and then you can bring back in Taylor just to slice and dice defense.
And here's the elephant in the room, which is like you kind of just have to have these hard conversations sometimes. It's like, in the past couple of years, Jonathan Taylor just hasn't stayed healthy. And that's something that you have to look and think about. That was the kind of the thing that was haunting Saquon Barkley up until this year. And he stayed healthy for the majority of the games. And I know that the Eagles are very big on using data in terms of trying to make sure that Saquon is getting his carries. I know that they valued Kenny Gainwell a lot. Someone from from Steichen's time as well, of being able to be that third down guy when it wasn't time for they could take Saquon off the field. So I think that is something that they were missing, that you can't run. And I think you get a little bit of that with the quarterback run game, but it's like running Jonathan Taylor into the ground consistently. And then when he was out of the lineup and the run game was non-existent in Jacksonville, I think he was out for, he was back from Buffalo, but he was out for Minnesota.
He missed like a month of play this season.
Yeah, he missed like a month,
a chunk of games. Yeah,
because he got hurt in the Pittsburgh game, I think. I want to say right, but when you can't go through stretch, you can't look at a running back class like this where there's so many draftable players and say Jonathan Taylor isn't going to have. We're going to be screwed essentially if Jonathan Taylor was to get hurt again.
Yeah, and I think the draft is just the perfect place to address that. Not even just because this draft is strong at running back, but just because like these are good young running backs that are getting a lot of experience at a young age in the NFL. Like just keep replenishing the well. Like draft one every year, whether it's in round 6 or 7, whether it's in round 3 or 4. Like just keep drafting them, and you're going to stumble upon some good ones to round out your running back room. But before we get out of this section, Ben, were there any other running backs that really caught your eyes? You mentioned Scatterbo, Judkins, Gordon. Any other running backs? I personally love the Kansas dude, Devin Neal. Devin Neal
is a great one as well. Obviously, I mean, I think he's going to be way too high. Amarian Hampton was outstanding. I mean, the Colts. There are teams that are way more needy at running back, and the Colts aren't going to. Like, I think Quinshon Judkins is, again, you asked me the highest I would go, and that would be probably if Quinshon Judkins was there in the second round, is something you consider. I like Travion Henderson as well. I think you're probably going to have to fight off the Raiders and Chip Kelly just bringing those guys right back. But RJ Harvey is a guy that I thought was really good when I watched him. Kyle Monungai, I think from Rutgers, is super slippery. He struggled in pass protection, so I'm kind of going back on what I said there. But I think there's so many guys that you could talk me into. in this class. Dylan Sampson is a guy that like he is an electric runner. I don't think he'll make it there, but I think that the running backs are going to go early and often. I just don't think there's any way that the Colts aren't going to take one at least by the fourth. I think the fourth round would be the floor for me. Is where the Colts will probably take one.
Yeah, it really depends on how the draft falls and what they do in free agency. But if they address some of these like needs on defense in free agency, then yeah, I do think running back is certainly in play. And I'll say this, man, I'll risk it all for Hampton from North Carolina. I love him. I love that. He is so good.
So good. So good.
If he's there in round 2, I'd take him. I don't care. He's just that good of a player. But that's a conversation for another day right there. But coming up, guys, we're going to take a step back in this draft conversation, talk about just our overall thoughts on the class and how the Colts could approach this, and how, as of right now, Ben and I are a little bit stumped on how the Colts could go about this draft. We'll obviously get more answers with free agency, but yeah, I think we're a little bit stumped. We'll talk about that in here in just a second. All right, Locked On Colts every day as we are back talking all about the 2025 NFL Draft. I'm joined by Ben Bors at Colts Film Room. And to kind of start this conversation here, Ben, with just our overall thoughts on this class. You know, it's still kind of early. We don't have the testing. Like, I'm sure there will be some guy who's projected in round 3 right now. Come next week, all of a sudden he's getting top 15 love because he ran the fastest 3-cone time in the history of the event or something. Like, it happens every year. So there will be some guys who rise up here, obviously with the combine right around the corner. But as of right now, this is a weird draft for the Colts. And I put out a tweet the other day, and I think you agreed with it too. So I think this is a good place to start with, where last year, even at this time before the combine, I had a list of like 5, 6, 7 guys come pick 15 that I would be in love with for the Colts, like Quinyon Mitchell, Brian Thomas Jr., Dallas Turner. Like, if any of those guys were there, like if any of those guys were there, Dunze Bowers, it was like, run that card in, get yourself a blue chip player. And honestly, Latu wasn't even on there, and I still kind of liked him after the draft as well. This year, I don't even have one that I'd run the card in for. Like, Tyler Warren, I like a lot, and I would probably take him at 14. But I'm not as enthused with Tyler Warren at 14 this year than I would have been even with like Quinyon Mitchell at 15. And you guys can dig on my old tweets on that one too. So that's not just me saying it after the fact. So it's a weird draft, man. Like, I am not super in love with the Colts options at 14. Again, maybe some guy runs a 4-1 at receiver or something, and all of a sudden I'm just saying I need to have him at 14 next week. But as of right now, man, I don't know. The top of this draft is weird, and I'm curious to see what the Colts do with that first round pick.
So, yeah, I think I'm actually not sure that there's anyone that I would straight up run the card that is realistic. Like, if Travis Hunter is going to be there, like, yes, but he's
Mason Graham,
not.
baby. We go 3 defensive
Abdul
tackles.
Carter makes his who else is at the top of the draft? Like, these not Genti. I'm just saying these like blue chip guys. Like, if they fall, like, but they're not gonna. So I think when you're sitting there at 14, it's such a weird part of the draft because I think when you're sitting there at like as a top 5, 6, 7, you have an idea of, you can do some more digging to figure out who realistically is going to be there. First, I have no idea who's going to be there. I have really no idea who really like. There aren't a lot of like. It sounds boring, but like trenches, I think is absolutely live to be a 14 pick. Like, if Shamar Stewart is there, is that athletic defensive end type that's big enough to play 6 technique, like, is that somewhere that they just do it again and then they just say, we're just going to follow the Eagles model of just we're drafting trenches? I don't know. And that's where I think that first of all, I'm not convinced they're going to pick at 14, regardless of how free agency goes. I think that they will either panic and trade up for Tyler Warren, or they hold out for Tyler Warren, but I don't think that's the case. I think just realistically he won't be there, and they trade down, and then drafting a running back in round 2 becomes very realistic if you have like 2 other day 2 picks. So that's where I think that it'll be really interesting to do where they do at the top of the draft, because you're right. I don't see a ton of like Colts need this guy is available in that range right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too with this draft, like going outside of round one, because this also isn't like the deepest draft. Like I think it's a good like Friday draft. Like there are some good players for round 2 and 3, but I don't think it's like an uber deep draft even there. And then it certainly falls off like we've seen in years past as you get to day 3, like most drafts do. But it's not like this draft where I think you can fill out your team with a bunch of day 1 contributors. Like I think it's going to be like, kind of like last year where they were kind of reaching for what they thought were backup linemen in round 3 and round 4. So trade back, I think, becomes really realistic so you can get 3 guys in the first 2 rounds and add more young talent to this team. But then when we get to like day 2, for instance, free agency is going to be a big part of this because I do think the Colts are going to be pretty active in free agency on the defensive side of the ball.
I'm right there with you.
So do you go offense in the draft then? Or do you just commit this whole offseason, all defense, baby? Like we're signing a starting corner, we're signing a starting linebacker, we're drafting another corner, we're drafting a safety. Is this an offseason where every single resource goes to defense, or just like the free agency does to the defense? Like we get older on defense and younger on offense. I'm curious to see which way the Colts go with that.
And Chris Ballard, it sounds like so basic, but like he really has drafted at the position that you thought was going to be a need if that player's there. Like edge rusher, like I had put a tweet out like when Colts film just started, but like edge rusher was very alive as something that the Colts needed last offseason. Despite feeling like they had coming off the franchise record in sacks, they still needed an edge rusher. I think they've done that in the past, with guys like even to the second round, like Michael Pittman, wide receiver was a really big need. Alec Pierce, wide receiver, was still really a big need. Like they have done that. So I think that's the type of thing when you look at Lou Anarumo's past, he is a guy, and you also kind of look at the Colts situation right now where I don't think they've gone young in the secondary, and they don't have Chris Ballard sat there in front of the media and said, we were going to live through the growing pains. Does he want to do that with these guys in the draft? And that's where I've kind of been on and off about like, the Colts are prioritizing DB. From the staff that they have hired, they are bringing in a star-studded DB staff to try and fix the secondary. Now, the players that go along with that, I've lost some confidence that they're going to be taking a guy at 14 or in that first round, just from Lou Anarumo's history of prioritizing guys who are smart and instinctive and vet guys in the secondary, as well as on the defense as well. So I think that's also a factor as well when you consider Lou Anarumo and that hire and just his experience. So I'm agreeing with you. I think they're going to be active.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned there about with Chris Ballard. We might not always know the player. We kind of Bill Ballard's pretty good outside of Latu last year. A little toot my own horn there, but outside of Latu last year, it's been pretty good. But we don't always know the player they're going to take, but we usually know the position that the Colts are targeting. Like last year, even if edge wasn't the number 1 position we were all circling, it was like number 2 or 3.
And then wide receiver, and they probably tried up to get a wide receiver, a tight end, and they didn't address it in round 2 with A.D. Mitchell. So
right, exactly where I was going with that. Bernhard Ryman's draft season, we knew they were going to take a tackle at some point. They got Ryman. We knew a tight end was coming at some point. They took 2 tight ends that draft. The Alec Pierce, we knew they were going to get one of those bundles of wide receivers with Pierce or Sky Moore or George Pickens. Like we knew one of those. So like we usually know what position the Colts are going. Outside of tight end right now, though, I don't really know what position the Colts are going to go. And well, I guess we'll see with free agency.
I don't think they do. Yeah. The other thing that's like worth pointing out is like for a guy that Chris Ballard is like, take the best player available, he'll do it. But when that position of need is the best player available, so he'll trade down. If he, like with the A.D. Mitchell thing, he traded down to go get A.D. Mitchell because he knew he could do it and he was the best player available at the time. Juju Brents is another great example of trading down to where he thought he could get a guy, and that's what he'll do. So I think you're so right that we usually know the positions. We just don't know when or the player.
Yeah. And I'll pose this one last question before we get out of here, because what you just said made me think of something where Chris Ballard likes to take best player available at position that he didn't address earlier in the offseason, right? So it's best player available, but I need an edge rusher. So best edge available or best playmaker available, right? But say we get to pick 14, say the Colts, for the most part, address everything but like tight end in free agency, right? We get to 14. Warren's gone. They don't want to take Loveland there. And BPA is like a defensive tackle or a guard or what's another one? A defensive end again. Like they just took defensive end last year, but like a defensive end again. Like, do we see? Look, Chris Ballard loves the trenches, man. He will take trenches.
I'm not ruling out, and I don't think that like Daniel Jeremiah put out a series of tweets. I just agree with it. It's like everyone is like scoffs at like drafting an offensive tackle or an offensive guard in the first round or like a defensive end in the first round because it's not like you can't just like picture. You can't play with them in Madden and you can't draft them on your fantasy team. And that's how the Eagles made it to the Super Bowl. They drafted Nolan Smith. They drafted Jalen Carter. They've continuously invested in the trenches year after year after year after year. Obviously, they have Jeff Stoutland, but like that's what they do. So I think that that's something that we're not talking about. Like if Shamar Stewart is there, you have to see what his testing numbers are, of course. But if he's there and like you're in that situation, I am absolutely not ruling out Chris Ballard taking another edge rusher and saying Kwity Paye is on a 5th-year option. We don't know who's going to be we know that Latu will be here. Shamar Stewart. And I don't think that anyone's talking about that, but I think it's also a factor.
Look, man, all I'm going to say this about Shamar Stewart before we get out of here, because we'll do another episode on Shamar Stewart at some point. He's like, what, 6'6", 280, long arms, Senior Bowl standout, very athletic. And who are they losing in free agency potentially this offseason? Dayo Adengbo. So there is that role opening up on the defense.
You need to bookmark this for after the draft and be like, he already knew.
Like, I'm just saying, like, I think it's really possible that I could technically do that with any draft prospect. I do a daily podcast during February for the NFL. Like, I could do that with any draft prospect. I've called every pick. I'm sure I called Latu somehow last year too, even though I wasn't a huge fan. But yeah, no, I think Shamar Stewart could make sense. And look, again, I will say this one more time. Chris Ballard, trenches. He is investing high picks and investing big money in trenches over secondary and playmakers. It's always what he does, you know? So when we're looking at pick 14, I can't rule out a guard, can't rule out a tackle, can't rule out a defensive tackle, can't rule out a defensive end because this is how Chris Ballard operates. I know we all wanted to change.
You put Kenneth Grant out there. I think that pick is very alive. Like,
I mean, look, their defensive tackle plays a lot of snaps, but again, these are conversations for another day here. I just think we could see a trench play in the first round for the Colts for sure. But you guys let us know in the comment section what you think. Is it all in for Tyler Warren? Is it trade back and take a linebacker? I saw a lot of you guys loving the Jahad Campbell pick I made in the mock draft yesterday. So maybe a linebacker is where you go. Or
I don't see Chris Ballard doing that.
Yeah, we'll see. You guys let us know in the comment section below. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Next, go find Locked On NFL. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your more with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. And if you want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, and at Colts Film Room, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your ratings, reviews as well. And we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.